Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry, a fan channel where everything Dragalia Lost can be found. This video is going to contain some gameplay footage from, and my impressions on, the two Eldritch events currently running in Dragalia Lost. In case you missed it, the Accursed Archives, a facility event, and its sequel, Stirring Shadows, a story event, have been revived for around a week or so, and I definitely recommend everyone check them out. The rewards are fantastic, better than ever before for events of this type. The stories are super interesting and mysterious, full of Lovecraftian lore, and the characters are beloved by the community. Lathna, Curran, and Heinwald are all fan favorites, and even Akasha is popular with a certain segment of the player base. A Summon Showcase is live alongside these events, with all of the adventures and dragons tied to the events on an appearance straight up. But unlike the events themselves, the showcase is unfortunately a skip. Do your free daily tenfolds, but outside of that, I don't recommend summoning any further. It's hard to say that since I know back when I read these event stories for the first time, I really wanted to pull for the characters, but the truth is, none of these characters really stand out for Master Difficulty endgame content anymore. Lathna, Heinwald, and Curran are all okay for Expert Kayan, but don't have an easy time in Master. Akasha similarly lacks the Dispel she needs for Master Ciela, even though she's usable in Expert and has a good chain co-ability. It's not that these units can't clear, it's just that you'll have a much harder time if you try to use them in public lobbies due to the prevalence of Belina, Grace, Patia comps in Master Kai, and Templar Hope or Lowen comps in Master Ciela. And both dragons on this showcase are rather weak. Nyarlathotep can be unbound via Draconic Essences, and I expect the same to be true of Haster in time. The banner aside, let's dive into the event stories. There are some lingering mysteries I want to discuss, and I'm curious to read your thoughts in the comments. I reread both event stories, all of the related Adventure and Dragon stories, and even a bunch of Wormprint lore as of this rerun, so full spoilers from this point onward. Let's start by talking about Curran, Heinwald, and the Accursed Archives event. Accursed Archives was our first introduction to Heinwald and Curran. Curran is an inquisitor of the Ilian Church who investigates heretics, and Heinwald is his brilliant partner who enjoys unraveling mysteries and seeking new truths. Heinwald is from a noble Iberian family and is the heir apparent to his family estate, since his older sister and father have both passed away. Outside of his intellect and curiosity, we don't really know much about Heinwald's stitches, discolored hands, or how he knows all that he does. Curran's backstory is similarly mysterious. We know he's faithful to the Ilian Church, but don't really know why he became an Inquisitor to begin with. The Accursed Archives opens with Heinwald and Curran reporting to the prince and his party on their discovery of the Liber Grimortis in Heatherwood, where villagers have mysteriously disappeared. Heinwald notes that the grimoire tells of a hidden library full of all manner of occult knowledge somewhere near the Halidom, but the very fact that Heinwald can read the Liber Grimortis is itself remarkable. The tome is described on a wormprint of the same name, and it suggests that the Liber Grimortis can cause those who read it to go mad. This may be our first clue that there's something odd about Heinwald. Within the library, we then meet the Black Nyarlathotep, and only Heinwald can fully comprehend how they speak. This Nyarlathotep has many epithets, including Chaos, the Black, and of course, the Crawling Chaos. Their dragon story implies they seek sacrifices, particularly of unwilling souls corrupted by greed and desire. As the event unfolds, we learn that everyone from Heatherwood, save one girl, Lathna, was transformed into books within the Library Obscura. Each book is filled with outcries for help, but Heinwald catches on to something more sinister. The number of missing bodies from the village does not match the number of books, considering that the corpse of a priest was found within the village. This leads him to suspect the real Lathna is in a book, and the Lathna before them, who tempts the party to recite an incantation to supposedly free the tomb-bound villagers, is actually an imposter steering everyone towards a trap. Heinwald's hypothesis seems correct as Lathna begins to twist and transform into a white Nyarlathotep who begs for amnesty from the Ancient One for failing to lure our party into sacrificing themselves. It's explained that Nyarlathotep is a multifarious collective entity who is the emissary and key to awakening the Ancient One, the god to whom the villagers of Heatherwood and other heretics pray and hold sacrifice. The Black Nyarlathotep seems to bear no grudge against our party, nor care for the survival of the white, but it's also stated that Nyarlathotep cannot be so easily destroyed or revoked from existence as a whole. Heinwald casts a spell to seal the white Nyarlathotep, who says their quietus is their genesis as it fades, meaning their death is their creation. implying Nyarlathotep, while sealed somehow, is not truly gone. The villagers, freed from the White Nyarlathotep spell, are released from the tomes in which they were bound, including Lathna, who is different than the Lathna we previously met. This is apparently the real girl from the village, and this moment represents her meeting Curran and Heinwald for the first time. In the end, Heinwald convinces the party to allow the library to remain unsealed. The story ends with a last conversation between the Black Nyarlathotep and Heinwald, in which Heinwald asks whether all of the events have happened exactly as the Black Nyarlathotep desired to begin with, granting them and their library freedom. Nyarlathotep notes Heinwald is able to understand the abyss without being beguiled by it, and in the final scene, Nyarlathotep dissipates, Heinwald is shown, and says, "Or are the abyss itself." There's lots of different ways to read this, and that's certainly by design. Some see this as evidence that Heinwald is yet another facet or form of Nyarlathotep, who we know to be multifarious. Another interpretation is that Heinwald somehow absorbed Nyarlathotep using his sealing spell, since it looks as though the Black Nyarlathotep is dissolved into him as the story ends. A third reading I've seen is that Heinwald chooses to swap places with Nyarlathotep in a deal of sorts, so that he can stay in the library reading to his heart's content, while the Black Nyarlathotep assumes his form, free to leave the library at his will. We know Heinwald and Nyarlathotep had a long conversation away from the rest of the cast, so any of these theories seem plausible to me. The point is never further explained in any relevant side stories. And that's where we pick up with Stirring Shadows. The event begins with the real Lathna from the Accursed archives having nightmares about Nyarlathotep after having returned to Heatherwood. In a state of possession, she runs away from her village, declaring herself to be Chaos and the silver key that swings wide the gate. Curran explains the situation to Heinwald, who notes how unusual it is that Nyarlathotep seems to have visited the world again through Lathna. He ponders why the two are resonating with each other as he and Curran depart for Tensum, known as the Immortal Village, to find Lathna and investigate what's up. Within the village, Curran and Heinwald meet Akasha, a priestess of the Church of All who leads the villagers in their worship of Hastur, a dragon believed to grant immortality to those who pray to it. Entranced by the prospect of immortality, the cultist villagers offer themselves up to receive Hastur's blessing, effectively sacrificing themselves to live on forever as a copy of Hastur himself. Hastur's abilities are mysterious, and even his real location outside of the village isn't clear by the end of the story. He's known as the King in Yellow and the Unspeakable One, and his dragon story implies he is able to control his form. In that story, he appears as a precious stone that consumes animals and humans as sacrifices. Instead, we learn it's mainly Akasha who is pulling the strings in Tensum. Heinwald sleuths out her goal is to use Lathna as the silver key to open the ancient gate, thereby freeing the Ancient One. Akasha states that she herself is the gate, and it seems as though her mere embrace of Lathna might be enough to usher the Ancient One into the world. In the lead up to the story's climax, the Hastur copies seem to blindly do her bidding, suggesting her abyssal powers may truly exceed those of even Hastur's. From Postmortem Panic, we know that Akasha has the power to use glamour to control others, but that power is attributed to her vampire garb within the Onslaught event. From her standard adventurer story, though, it seems that may be an inherent ability of hers, since she joins the Halidom and everyone is convinced she's always been there. Akasha's origins are an enigma, and we only know what she shares with Heinwald during her adventurer story. In it, we learn of a woman named Akasha who enjoyed research and the pursuit of knowledge above all else. Knowledge was this woman's escape from the abuse of her academic colleagues and the expectations of her noble household. Eventually, she was assigned to investigate a cursed tome from which the image of the priestess Akasha emerged and began to haunt her. When she later was denied the opportunity to continue researching the tome, the voice of the priestess beckoned and Akasha decided to answer, opting to open the gate to a sea of knowledge, surrendering herself to nothingness. Akasha goes on to tell Heinwald that she's unsure if her origin story is even true because she now exists across many selves, times, and dimensions, adrift in omniscience but with no memory or care for truth. Akasha's powers aside, the Stirring Shadows story ends with Curran and Heinwald rescuing Lathna and explaining to her that regardless of what dwells within her, she's still herself, and that anyone has the capacity for good or evil. Heinwald postulates that Lathna can control the Nyarlathotep within her, and that it emerges when she is afraid or needs to protect herself or others. Lathna returns home, as does our investigatory duo, but we then cut to a final conversation between Akasha and Heinwald, who has ventured far to find her. Heinwald asks Akasha whether or not her plan unfolded as she intended, considering the sway she held over Tensum. He then states that he has a vested interest in learning where Akasha's motives truly lie. Akasha replies in a riddle: "What is the goal of the cock who crows long before the coming of the dawn?" Heinwald says he has his answer after hearing this, but Akasha responds in turn that he only has half of it. When he asks about the other half, she responds, "The drowsing, faceless fragment still remains there, yes?" To which Heinwald does not answer. Then Akasha inquires as to the nature of Heinwald, and his final question for her is another mystery. "Why would you think that I have not awakened?" Just like the end of the Accursed archives, the end of Stirring Shadows is subject to interpretation. Let's work backwards, starting with Heinwald's last line. One reading of Heinwald is that he is the Ancient One himself. Whether from the events of Accursed archives or otherwise, if the Ancient One is Heinwald and has already awakened, then there would be no need for Akasha to awaken him at all. This would also explain the exchange with Nyarlathotep about being the Abyss itself. A more mundane reading is that Heinwald being awakened merely means he's aware of the nature of the Abyss or the nature of reality. Like Akasha, perhaps he's just privy to the existence of some higher dimensions of knowledge that would drive most normal individuals mad, maybe from his readings in the Library Obscura or elsewhere. Besides those takes, there's still the possibility that Heinwald is just another facet of Nyarlathotep as well. Let's next turn to the drowsing, faceless fragment to which Akasha referred. This could be Nyarlathotep speaking of the fragment of Nyarlathotep that remains within Lathna. It could also be a nod to Hastur, since his dragon story implies he also has the ability to change forms into a stone or small fragment. Or it might be reference to another character who we've yet to meet, such as Cthulhu, who is often portrayed as drowsing, dreaming, or in a state of slumber. If we lean into the language of fragment in the context of Dragalia Lost, we might also consider the possibility of an otherworld fragment. These objects are dropped from fiends of exceptional power and allow temporary entry into the otherworld. I'll elaborate on this point shortly, since I think it relates to where we might be headed next, but overall I do think it'd be a bit odd to call an otherworld fragment faceless or drowsing, so I don't think that's what Akasha is talking about here. I think she probably means a piece of Nyarlathotep sleeps within Lathna. And that brings us to the cock who crows long before the coming of the dawn. It's common for roosters to crow right at dawn to awaken a household or signal the start of the day, but what does it mean to do so far before then? A few theories come to mind. One possibility is that a predator is afoot. Other options lean more upon superstition. A rooster crowing early is sometimes a harbinger of bad news or of death. Another possibility, though, is that Akasha simply seeks to gather others to her before the gate opens. If I had to guess, I think Akasha knew her scheme with Hastur might draw forth Nyarlathotep or possibly other awakened ones such as Heinwald, and for some reason it's important to her to convene them all. At the end of the day, it's all still a mystery. The other adventure stories and Wormprint texts shed some light on things, but not too much. Lathna's adventurous story is especially interesting. After the events of Stirring Shadows, she moves to a town called Kiril, where she has nightmares every night of deaths of cats and humans, and awakens to find they've actually died in reality. Her story is told through a diary, and even though she's eventually moved to the Halidom for safety and her name is cleared, one of the dead cats, Ulthur, is still present with her, and he bears a malevolent grin. In addition, the final entry of Lathna's diary makes clear her prayers aren't to Ilia as a savior. Her prayers and diary entries are actually addressed to the Ancient One, which may make sense considering she was raised among heretics in Heatherwood. The stories for the alts don't add anything especially noteworthy to the Ancient One lore. Currens mentions copies of the Liber Grimordis, and Akasha's mentions her master, presumably the Ancient One itself. As far as Wormprints, From Whence He Comes and Prayers Unto Him are two of the more noteworthy ones. Prayers Unto Him describes Lathna as the key and Akasha as the gate, but questions whether their union means the coming dawn or a terminus, and states only he who sleeps knows. As far as I can tell, this is the only mention of that particular epithet in the game. Nowhere else is the Ancient One referred to as he who sleeps, suggesting to me that while this could be the Ancient One, it might also be an as of yet unknown character, perhaps some other character representing Cthulhu. As for the other Wormprint From Whence He Comes, this shows a scene between Heinwald and Hastur, in which Heinwald raises his staff and Hastur writhes as nearby villagers all turn into tentacles. The narrator is watching on and becomes a tentacle themselves, declaring themselves to be united with the others as the Whisperer in the Dark. It's possible this could be Heinwald's moment of awakening, but otherwise, this scene is never really explained. As far as the Cthulhu mythos, my personal take is that Akasha probably represents Shub-Nigrath. Heinwald is Yog-Sothoth, and the Ancient One is Azathoth. I think this would explain how both of them are able to deal in abyssal knowledge without facing madness, and also explain Akasha's infatuation with Heinwald's. With Akasha, we saw how the priestess came to merge with the original researcher, and I suspect the same may have at a time happened to Heinwald. The difference between them and Lathna seems to be that they have more control over the abyssal beings that dwell within them. I've also seen some takes that Curran is or houses the Ancient One, since Azathoth is called the blind idiot god, and Curran isn't exactly known for his smarts or awareness, but personally I think the Ancient One is more likely to be a dragon or fiend who was sealed away within the Otherworld. The gate and key seem to me like a way to free it from its otherworldly binding. At the same time, it would be pretty funny and pretty crazy if Curran, who hunts heretics, ended up being the target of their worship. It would also sort of explain why he so frequently finds himself in situations dealing with heretical worshippers of the Ancient One. And, well, that takes me to what I think is coming next. We know from the game's 2nd anniversary website that an event is planned for late October, and we also know a summon showcase is coming with it. I think this is our true high production value Halloween event, and it'll be the next chapter to the Accursed archives and Stirring Shadows. When it comes to keys and gates, I have to think about Omega keys and gates to the Otherworld, so I personally believe we'll be getting a raid event this time around. My theory is the event will start off simple enough. Melsa and Lathna go trick-or-treating, but instead of candy, an odd man hands out Otherworld fragments. Yet the children are so enraptured by their splendor that they all gleefully take them to their homes. At night, the fragments stir and rifts in space tear into each child's house. Tentacles slither forth from the portals and abduct the children's parents into the Otherworld, since the children themselves are pure of heart, unsuitable to supplicate the Ancient One. Perhaps even Curran is unwittingly taken in. In order to rescue the abducted, Heinwald deduces that Lathna and Akasha must unite to open the gate, not to free the Ancient One per se, but to enter the gate and pacify it. I could see the Ancient One raid boss being a giant worm or hydra whose tendrils spawn in the arena. Perhaps some of the zombie soldiers from the Onslaught event could even fight alongside him, symbolizing the departed souls who were sacrificed to the Ancient One. As far as the strange man who handed out the Otherworld fragments and sparked this chain of events, well, I think that might be our Dragalia version of Cthulhu, a character I do expect to eventually appear in one form or another. Oh, and I totally think Lathna and Heinwald get alt if this idea pans out. Lathna could dress as her cat Ulthur and maybe become the Black Nyarlathotep this time around, and Heinwald could wield a Manicaster, perhaps dressed as a traditional detective. The big unknown for me is who our free raid adventurer would be, and that is hard to place since the cast already feels pretty large. But if there are two other adventurers who I think might fit in with the Lovecraftian lore, they're Kleiman and the yet-to-be-seen Nephrim from the Braving the Unknown Wormprint. The final goal of Kleiman's research is to die in ritual sacrifice to see what becomes of his soul. And Nephrim is a mystery, but her scientific curiosity may make her a good fit for this story arc. I'm sure Kleiman and Akasha would have a fascinating conversation for one. But at the end of the day, this is all just pure speculation, and with the event not too far off, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I know I'm hoping for more Ancient One lore, but you never know. We could get something totally different. Anyway, y'all, that's pretty much all I have to say on these two Eldritch events. I'm excited to read your theories and impressions on Accursed Archives and Stirring Shadows, so let me know what you think in the comments below. Otherwise, everyone, thank you so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time.